Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. Okay, so we're going to get started. So if you got anyone who's not seated can take a seat. So how's everyone doing tonight? Enjoying the weather these days? You know? My name is Ishan Shabazz, for those who don't know, and welcome to another community event of the Institute of Higher Reasoning. And today the topic is tackling racism and bigotry, which happens to be still one of the underpinning reasons for a lot of the mess that the current world is in. But before we get into the presentations and discussing this further with you, I just want to tell you a little more about the Institute of Higher Reasoning. The Institute of Higher Reasoning, which is also for IHR, you can call it, is a think tank that promotes compassionate and rational thinking. One of our mandates is to engage with the public, discuss with them on very meaningful topics, such as the one that we're going to talk about today. And I believe you have flyers for our, which outlines our website. So when you have time to check out the works and some of the resources that we have available. I also just want to highlight a few of the topics we will be covering in our future sessions. So some of the topics, and again, this is a draft of the schedule and topics. The topics can change, but this is the plan. So some of the topics are the origin, nature, and unification of physical laws and the Quran, which is slated for March of 2017. An optimal monetary and economic system for humanity and nature, extraterrestrials and intraterrestrials in Islam. And for that one, we'll be having our esteemed IHR member who will be traveling in from the Andromeda Galaxy for that one. So stay tuned for that. The origin and nature of consciousness, Islam, animals, and environmental welfare and advocacy, history of the contention between Unitarianism and Islam and other belief systems, a socio-political analysis, the equigenic principle, the law of the balance in Islam, the laws governing the rise and fall of civilizations, how unique are humans, the place of humans in nature, and evolution in the Quran. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. The topics can change, but this is currently the plan right now. Now, before I introduce our first speaker, I just want to tell you a little bit about our first speaker, which will be Brother Nadeem Haq. Brother Nadeem Haq is a researcher and author and has co-authored 8 books, 4 nonfiction and 4 philosophical fiction, including From Facts to Values, copies which are available here, as well as his other books. His specialization includes analyzing the Quran to resolve the big questions in physics, evolution, pre-ancient history, epistemology, and consciousness. Nadeem has recently given talks at Harvard and Oxford universities in Paris on Islam and human welfare, and most recently in Poland at the European Society for the Study of Science and Theology. He is the grandson of Al-Hafiz B.A. Masri, who did a pioneering work and wrote Animals in Islam. Nadeem has continued research in this field, and by profession he's a civil engineer. So I call upon Brother Nadeem to the stage.
So this is a picture here. It's does anybody know what this is? This is basically they used to lynch people of African American origin, for hundreds of years actually. But this is around probably the turn of the century. Someone actually wrote a song about this and kind of to highlight the problem. It was called Strange Fruit. Because it's like fruit growing from a tree, but it's kind of very morose, And actually, this song, "Strange Fruit," was very influential in the civil rights movement in America. So my topic, or my portion of this topic, is going to be towards the unity of humanity, eliminating bigotry and racism. I'm going to talk about the Quranic and logical view of reality concerning this. Now, the Quran does not use the word racism or the Arabic version, of course. That's because no races as such exist. there is only humanity, and this is captured by the following verses. So let's go through them.
Oh, if you can come a little bit here,
yeah,
can come
okay.
at the camera here.
In the Quran, let's look at these Quranic verses. O mankind, be duly conscious of your sustainer, who has created you from a single self, plenum of consciousness. I'll talk about that later. And from it, its mate, and from them both has caused to issue a multitude of men and women. Therefore be duly conscious of God, by whom you demand your rights over one another. Certainly, God is a watcher over you. And O mankind, indeed, we have created you out of a male and a female, and have made you into nations and tribes, so that you might come to know one another. Assuredly, the noblest of you in the sight of God is the one who is most conscious of him. Surely God is all-knowing, all-aware. Actually, the Quran focuses on the creation of humanity with respect to nature. Basically, the Quran shows that not only is humanity one, but we must be cognizant of the Creator through his signs. Only then can we have true unity. So among his wonders, the Quranic verses, among his wonders is this. He creates you from dust, and then lo, you become human beings ranging far and wide. Among his wonders is the creation of the galactical systems, samawati, and the earth, and the diversity of your languages and colors. For behold, evidences indeed abound for all those who possess knowledge. And human beings, and wild, this is part of a bigger passage. Human beings and wild and domestic animals are also comprised of colorful variations. Thus, only those among his creatures who humble themselves before God, the word is khashiyah, it means to humble, are truly the ulama. It's telling you who the ulama is. And ulama is not someone who necessarily goes to Al-Azhar or something. Allah is defining who the ulama are. The ulama are those who look at the signs in the universe, and then they humble themselves in front of God. That means it affects their behavior. Those are the people of knowledge. Okay. The word truly is not there, but basically it's are the people of knowledge. Now I want to put some perspective on the human being. Because we tend to be very arrogant as human beings. Now, this is our sun, Sol. This is Jupiter. Earth, you wouldn't even be able to see it. Look at this star. How much bigger is it from our sun? This is our sun, right? And this is not the largest star in the universe. There's one which is 40 times larger than this. You cannot even show it here. So now let's look at some Quran. So how big are we? That star is Arcturus, right? We are nothing but a speck upon a speck. The Earth going around a speck. The sun in a speck. The galaxy, that is one of perhaps several trillion galaxies. Now they think that there are probably trillions of galaxies. First they're saying there are probably 50 billion or 100 billion, they said. And now they've kind of realized that there are probably more. And all this, the entire universe in the eyes of God is just a speck. Like, Allah is so great that the whole universe is like a speck to him. There's a Quranic verse, and this is a paraphrase. It says, the creation of the universe is far greater. It may say the creation of the universe and the earth, but I think it's the creation of the universe though. It's far greater than the creation of the human beings, but most human beings don't know that. Indeed, now think of it logically too. If a human being is trying to compare himself to the universe, he can't because it's part of the system. So indeed, the creation of the universe includes the human, because the human is also part of the system. Now I want to talk to you about this very important concept, and I'm just going to apply this concept to the issue of so-called racism right now. But this concept, the awe, it actually solves a lot of other issues that Muslims have been wondering about for over 1,000 years. So I'm talking to you about the awe of God. Those in awe of God cannot be racist. They cannot be bigots or involved in bigotry or tribalism. Now, think of it this way. Awe. Acknowledge God. Know the existence of God through logic and science. W. Welcome God. So once you know that God exists, you welcome. Bring God into their daily lives to a large but not necessarily full extent. E. Embrace God. Those who bring God completely into their lives. Now, if you acknowledge God, you welcome God, and you embrace God, then you have the awe of God. And I think everybody knows what awe means. It means, like you're just in awe. You realize how great something is. So You see, the thing is that if you don't acknowledge, if someone knocks on your door and you don't acknowledge it, then the person will not be able to come in. But if you acknowledge it, then the person acknowledges that there's a knocking and someone's there, you let the person in, then you welcome the person. But if you really like the person, you embrace the person. So this is supposed to be our relationship with Allah. You know, the ultimate. You have the awe of God. So the awe is the foundation of Islam. You cannot fake the awe. Either you have it or you don't have it. Because if you see something great, you feel it in yourself. You know? And it is actually the basis of praise, alhamd. Because I could praise something, but I could be faking it. I could just say, oh, this is great, but I don't think it's great. But awe is something you feel inside you. And that's why it is really the foundation of Islam. Everything flows from there. So if you don't, so what I'm saying here is you develop it, the awe, by curbing your harmful desires and seeking God through the signs of nature and the Quran and any truth that comes your way, any truth. You are below your potential and could be on a dangerous path of self-destruction if you do not engage in this process of the awe, which the Quran is talking about all the time. A person through the awe becomes a natural and passionate trustee of the Creator. Now, if you loved art, you liked Rembrandt, you're in awe of this painter. He painted self-portraits. Then would you do this to him? Would you do this? You wouldn't do it, right? So would you desecrate nature? If you're in awe of Allah, would you desecrate humanity? This is a genocide. You wouldn't, because you're in awe of Allah's creation. So that's why I'm trying to show you that the concept of the awe is really the foundation. Now, with respect to the issue of racism, if we keep fixing the cracks but don't go to the foundation, we will always be doing patchwork, and one day the building will collapse. So you can see that the Quran takes us to the root where racism and bigotry are. Where racism and bigotry are symptoms of a deeper existential problem, the problem of self-concept. True self-concept can only be understood by being honest, looking into the signs of nature and history, and therefore knowing your place in the existential scheme and where you are headed. This requires the use of reason. Now, psycholinguistic programming, brainwashing. So society uses language in a particular way by which people are controlled. The false narrative must change. Saying that there is racism buys into the false narrative because no races exist. So how can you even talk about racism? Because it doesn't exist. Races do not exist. So in a way, we become like Manchurian candidates and act on verbal triggers that bypass the basic dictums of reason, and in so doing become victims ourselves. This is a movie, and if you haven't seen it, everybody should see this movie. It's an old movie. It's called The Manchurian Candidate, where a person is brainwashed. Some prisoners are brainwashed, and they are, if they see particular cards, then they go and their psychology is activated so that they go and murder someone. So it's basically a kind of a brainwashing process. So similarly, we are also brainwashed by the use of the words like racism, because then we start thinking, oh yeah, there are racists. But this whole concept of racism began with colonialism, with the British Empire, and especially with and the slave trade. Because before that, people were not really using this word racism. Actually, the word racism itself was first used in 1902 by someone. That doesn't mean that people were not prejudiced against each other, but I'm saying that, especially in the 20th and 21st century, this kind of concept that there are many different races and started to really take hold of people. Now, I will give you an example of psycholinguistic programming. So I'm saying mankind must grow up before it is too late. Example of PLPs, psycholinguistic programming. For example, we say mixed marriages. What are we mixing? It sounds mixed up to me. Or we say minorities. In what way? Are we not all human? Looks like we are only using a minor part of our brains. Untouchables, the caste system in India, etc. The only thing that should be untouchable is such a notion. A human being must not be judged on status in society, appearance, or place of origin, but on actions for or against truth and justice, and on the usage of natural design. Now, we all emanate from, a pair, as the Quran is saying, at some point in the past. One example of this, for example, is linguistic evidence. For example, here we have Urdu and Hindi, but they're part of the Indo-European languages. So there was some kind of language way back in the past, over 2,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago, and it split into many languages. One of them being Hindi and Urdu on this branch. On this branch you have Italian. And then this also goes back. And even that goes back to some original language that the linguists are thinking of, but actually goes even further back. Because we're not going to get into evolution, but that may be another topic. But really, the origin of man goes way, way back. And this language started way back, millions of years ago, when human beings started to evolve. So, and there's evidence for this in the Quran, but we're not going to cover it in this seminar. We might, in the question and answer period, talk about it a bit. Okay, so now I want to go back to the verse I had been talking about before, because I think that the Muslims and the Muslim world doesn't actually understand what this verse is truly saying, and I want to clear this. So it says, hence the concept of affinity through the realization of our original interlinkage and the fact that we share in the consciousness that is derived from the same source, Allah, is what that verse 4:1 cited earlier is actually saying. It's saying, remember that verse said, O mankind, be duly conscious of your sustainer, who has created you from a single self. The word there is nafs. Okay? It's not saying that, the way I see it, it's not saying that there was a particular person, and from that person, the pairs were created. It's not saying that, because the word it uses nafs. Nafs means self or consciousness. Doesn't matter where you go in the Quran, that's what it means. So what it is that our consciousness comes from a greater consciousness, which Allah allows us to access. And therefore we've all become conscious. So what I'm saying here is, this consciousness access willed by Allah encompasses all sentient life. From a slug, like a little insect, which is also conscious, to a highly evolved alien life form should we encounter it in the future. When we realize we have something in common, we have affinity. So what I mean by this, let's say that you're traveling in some foreign land and you don't speak the language, and suddenly you see someone who speaks your language. He has something in common with you. You feel close. You feel affinity. So what I'm saying here is that all sentient life has this commonality, which is consciousness. And if we realize that, then we will not harm them, because we know that it is the same. It is just that Allah has developed a slightly more complicated due to our nervous systems, and we're able to access more of that. That's all. So we cannot be arrogant. And so affinity leads to compassion and empathy. Empathy means, you put yourself in the shoes of the other. How does he or she feel by my actions? You cannot really be a true human being if you do not have any compassion. So the Prophet Muhammad, this is a hadith actually, which I'm trying to get the reference for, but it's a paraphrase of it. The Prophet Muhammad once instructed his companions to be compassionate towards each other. They said, but we are indeed so towards our families and relatives. He retorted that this is not what he was referring to. He was referring to being a practitioner of universal consciousness, compassion. Now remember that in the Quran states that Prophet Muhammad was a mercy to the world. Okay? Are you a mercy to the world? Am I a mercy to the world? Because you and me, we are supposed to emulate him. If everyone would be a mercy to everyone, then we would be living in a different type of world. So don't tread on the path of error. Iblis, who was, the Quran, it says he was of the jinn. He was a speciesist. Because, so what happened is, now imagine, our forms are made of particles, but our consciousness is from the same source. So superiority and inferiority is a moot point. The particles in our body are 13.8 billion years old and recycled material from possibly 4 generations of stars from which we originated, and ultimately from the Big Bang. Okay, so everything's been recycled. I mean, someone says, how old are you? Okay, I may be a certain age, but really these particles are 13.8 billion years old. They're just being reused. Maybe a proton in your eye was once in the fur of a saber-toothed-like tiger, chasing humanoids on an Earth-like planet thousands of light years away, billions of years ago, because it's just recycled material. So actually what Iblis was a speciesist, because he said that you made him, the word min is not used, you made him clay, but I am from fire. I have to check the exact, where the word min is used. But basically he was saying that he's special. He's some type of energy form which is higher than what human beings are. Okay. And this is false pride. So now, there's one person, Malcolm X, who really he really dealt with this issue in a very engaging manner, and he paid his life with it. And many years ago, 15 years ago, I wrote a kind of a poem or a rap, and then I have it here. So if you want, I can read it very fast. And this ain't no ordinary rap. This ain't no lovey-dovey crap. This is for peace and justice. This is something no one should miss. If you want to know about life, listen to the story of strife. Don't pull the trigger. Go figure. You can always turn back onto the right track. Believe in human brotherhood, not in the brotherhood. Stand up to the criminalities of capitalism, destroying the earth by creating schism. The League of Thieves are called peacemakers. Wake up, brother. They're only peace takers. That's the story of my life with flaws. Being a rebel with a really just cause. Incarcerated in prison. Blows to the head every season. Brought to life by reason. Sharp like a knife called treason. To know the truth, it's unspeakable. They call me uncouth, but I'm reasonable. I wanted to know because I had to grow towards a singular divine intelligence, who was my one and only real defense. But when I got out, so when he got out of prison, sharks chased the trout. They wanted me to conform to the norm, to reform, but I call it to deform, the natural way of thinking, to avoid sinking, in the despair of nihilism, trapped by the snare of tribalism, which is what we're talking about, masquerading as democracy, nothing but disguised hypocrisy. He said that. Democracy is nothing but disguised hypocrisy. Seeing the truth, I'm now rejuvenated. We are one and are all related. How could this I not have contemplated? Must have been intellectual constipated, to the trappings of society satiated, with consumeristic mind inflated, resultingly and falsely elated, drunk, which they call inebriated, forgetting that we were once originated, that once we were originated, to die, then to be recreated. In your mind, you make your own deep hell. The choices in your hands shake well. Free yourself from your self-created cell. This trance is but nothing but a spell. This rap is but a wake-up bell. If you're smart, you will then run pell-mell from what these devils are trying to sell to a life that ain't abysmal. For all that, he got executed because he spoke the truth. So remember I talked about self-concept. If you're a racist, you're so-called racist, you have a very wrong concept about yourself, because in order to function properly and in a true sense in the universe, you have to know where you fit in. So Malcolm X, the reason why he called himself X was he said that he didn't want a slave name. So he said, I don't know who my ancestors were. They were from Africa. I call myself X. So Malcolm X realized the power of Islam when he came back from the Hajj. And this is what he said. He said, it is not a problem of civil rights, but a problem of human rights. This is what he's saying. They asked me what about the Hajj had impressed me the most. I said, the brotherhood, the people of all races, colors from all over the world, coming together as one. It has proved to me the power of one God. And then he said, I believe and recognize every human being, neither white, black, brown, nor red. When you are dealing with humanity as one family, there's no question of integration or intermarriage. It's just one human being marrying and living around with another human being. America needs to understand Islam because this is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem. I said to the Harlem Street audiences that only when mankind would submit to one God who created all, only then would mankind even approach the peace of which so much talk could be heard, but towards which so little action was seen. Metaphorically speaking, Malcolm went from X, a problematic self-concept, to realizing his humanity as a created being with a clearly defined purpose. He went from X to Islam. Now, I had written an article when Hisham Jaber, the person who led the Janazah prayers of Malcolm X, he had come here, I met him. We had a conference he gave a talk at the University of Toronto. So I had written an article called From X to Islam, which I'll give to everybody. And I'm just quoting from that article. Analogously, Malcolm X and people like him through the centuries have tried to show the black man, the white man, or any other colored man is not at the center of the universe, but that, on the contrary, concern for all human beings and nature ought to be at the center of the universal agenda in this entire spectrum of life in this temporal cosmic abode. Whereas Galileo had been talking about planetary revolutions, Malcolm X had been talking about a revolution of thought on a planetary scale. Like any other real Muslim, the final Malcolm X saw things in black and white, not in the sense of racism or naive simplicity, but rather in the ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood with penetrating clarity. So, now you can understand that, more. You can think about it more and see it in this perspective more. That racism is something you learn, not something you were born with. The Quranic approach is the rational, evidential, logical, peaceful outlook that everyone should have and put into action. This is what Morgan Freeman said. He's an actor, as you may know. How do we stop racism? Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man, and I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. Summary. The main idea was to have, and I think we all know this, was to have humanity be united in the future after sending prophets to tribes. Yet this failed as people did not adhere to having the awe through the low desires that took them away from rationality and the awe. Yet the only hope for humans left on this planet is to recognize that we are all united in our humanity and hence sameness in this respect. But this cannot happen if we do not humble ourselves in front of Allah, God. Differences in color and or features, etc., are only excuses to subjugate one another. In other societies, there's a caste system, for example, that I talked about, but people are the same color. This is another form of bigotry. The root cause is the same, the recognition and awareness of an originator and the accountability towards the originator. One change can sentence the world, but one sentence can change the world. One community mankind is. Individual rights are the same across the board because God is the creator and owner of mankind and the cosmos, and we must preserve the balance. And actually the Quran talks of this. In chapter 23, verse 52, this community of yours is one, be conscious of me. But they have deviated from this unificatory command by introducing among themselves divergent scriptures, each faction rejoicing on their own. So, supposed to be one community, humankind is supposed to be one community in both belief system, voluntary peaceful submission to the will of God, i.e. Islam, and governance, through following the prophets. In the Quran it says that God could have made humankind one community, but then there would have been no test. He could have forced it. He didn't want to do it. So it's kind of simulated free will. So really, I conclude my talk here by saying that the only race that is important is towards God. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Brother. So I'd like to introduce you to Nelson, Colin, and Kofi. Out of these three gentlemen, who do you think the two are the most similar to each other? Any takers here?
Nelson and Kofi.
So who?
Nelson and Kofi.
You are incorrect. Actually, Nelson and Colin have the greatest of similarities. You know, there's tens of thousands of genes that make up the human genetic code. Only a tiny fraction influences skin color. So if race cannot be found biologically, then as a concept, it's an absurdity. And thus, before we are anything else, we are human. And as Nadeem had mentioned, the whole concept, the false narrative of there being distinct races was pretty much institutionalized during colonialism as a justification, as a reason to subjugate other people of a darker complexion. But unfortunately, when you have this, when we follow a false narrative, that actually paves the way for bigotry, which is still actually unfortunately happening. From the headlines you can see here, now I could have filled this page after page, after page, after page, after page, after page of reports of bigotry that's still going on in the world, but we don't have time for that. So I just filled up one page. But I'm going to just take just a closer look on a few of them. So let's take a look at this headline here. Southwest Airlines kicks Muslim off a plane for saying Inshallah, meaning God willing in Arabic. So this was a case where a Muslim man was told to leave a Southwest Airlines after another passenger overheard him speaking Arabic on his cell phone. So Kharaldin Makhzoumi was removed from the plane at Los Angeles International Airport. So this is what happened. Once seated in the airplane before, he had made a brief call to his uncle. Now before hanging up, he said the phrase Inshallah, which basically means God willing in Arabic. Immediately after, he noticed a woman staring at him as he hung up the phone. He thought at first she had been irritated by how loud he was speaking. Then all of a sudden, two police officers approached him, and he was told to get off the plane. And the police the agent escorted him, asked him why he was speaking in Arabic. Gee whiz. I didn't know there was a law against speaking in Arabic. Anyways, so then one of the questions that the agents asked him is, you need to be very honest with us with what you said about the martyrs. Tell us everything about the martyrs. So basically, the questioning soon ended after they realized, he was said, God willing in Arabic, but he was still kicked off the plane. And not before dogs were brought in to sniff his luggage, and he was searched, and his wallet was taken away. So in this case, if the cause of wrongdoing is being kicked off the airplane, then the initial wrongdoing was actually done by the other passenger who, without proof, accused this person, right? And that person should have been kicked off the plane instead of this passenger. So this is another case of injustice which is taking place based on bigotry. But here's another one. Passenger kicked off American Airlines flight after attendant announces, "I'll be watching you." So in this case, we have a case that a ban was removed from an American Airlines flight after a flight attendant publicly announced his name, seat number, and said she would be watching him. Mohammed Ahmed Rizwan had boarded a plane in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the flight attendant went to the announcer and said, "Mohammed Ahmed, C25A, I will be watching you." The employee made no other announcements about any other passenger. Mr. Rizwan asked the employee why she had made the announcements. She reportedly responded that she was being too sensitive. The passenger then reported the incident to other American airline employees. He was told he has to leave the plane because he made the first air stewardess uncomfortable. Okay, so in this case, if the cause in this case, actually the cause of someone to get off the airplane or being kicked off the airplane is because you're making someone feel uncomfortable, then actually it's the air stewardess who should be kicked off the plane because she was making him uncomfortable by singling him out. You understand what I'm saying here? We have cases of injustices, and it looks like a lot of people are asleep, and we're still kind of letting these things slide by. Now, something closer to home. This was an article in the CBC, and it's called Canadians. Okay, so the headline is Canadians want minorities to do more to fit in. So there was a joint poll done by Angus Reid and CBC, and they said that 68% of Canadian respondents said minorities should be doing more to fit in with mainstream society, whatever that means. So in a society of human beings, what in the world are you fitting into? Or what are you integrating into? But before I go on, you know what? I'll let Malcolm X explain that, which he did it in mere seconds. So this is a brief clip in which, in mere seconds, he kind of answers this question.
After your experience with white people in Mecca and other places in Africa, are you now an integrationist?
I'm for whatever will solve our people's problem, and I don't think I'll ever be referred to as an integrationist. I don't think integrationist is even the question, or even the topic, or the discussion. And it actually clouds the issue. The issue is, are we going to be human beings? Are you a human being, or am I a human being? And if we're all human beings, we should be able to get along together. It has nothing to do with integration, separation, or anything else.
And lastly, I want to cap off my part with another answer by Malcolm X. So in this interview, he was asked as to if you ever see a day when humanity will live together in peace, and this was his answer.
Along with that.
Well, one final question then. Do you foresee the day when the white man and the black man and all races all over the world can live together in peace?
When humanity looks upon itself not as black men, white men, brown men, red men, and yellow men, but as human beings, then they will sit down and live together in peace. Not when they look upon themselves as Americans or Europeans or Asians or Africans. Then they can sit down and live with each other in peace.
Okay, and I'll hand it over to Oli.
All right. Thank you, Sean. That was great. So I'll be talking about the political philosophy of race. So in generally, we'll be looking at how the liberal societies actually enables racism and discrimination. We'll be drawing upon some examples to prove our standpoint that racism and discrimination is actually not accidental. It's actually part of the liberal societies, and that's how they function. Race actually is a process which is embedded in a various range of legal technologies which are used against different part of the groups. So I'll start off with defining the race. I think it's very important that we actually get this definition in our heads before we move further along the presentation. Race defined within a socio-political framework. Race reflects the logics and dynamics of legal institutions, foreign policies, diplomatic relations, attitudes towards perceived outsiders, and the need by political authorities to respond or placate its constituencies in order to remain in power. In a nutshell, race is actually, as I mentioned before, it plays an instrumental role within the modern political context for the sovereign power, which is the state, to actually carry out its functions, which is to control the population of the masses. This, in turn, serves race to be a mode or vehicle of division, separation, hierarchy, and exploitation, rather than a scripted modifier. How the function of the race in the modern political society works is basically you have to think of it as a technology. So technology, as you all know, is considered to be an equipment where you have a input of the raw materials, you put into it, and it's mediated through different devices, and then it gives you a certain new product. So now the new product is thought to meet certain needs that we might have. Race within the juridical political context works the same way as technology. It's used by the sovereign power to actually facilitate to exercise its political might. So in a nutshell, how I would like to give an example is basically you need a chaos and a disorder in the society for the political power to exercise its might. If there's no disorder or in the society, then actually you really can't exercise your political power that way. Moving on, race function as technology, as I mentioned before, in 3 different dimensions. It is a vehicle deployed by law to channel certain elements in order to produce a set of classifications that constrain us to think about human beings as belonging to races, can be referred to as quote-unquote unruly. An example would be the one-drop rule, which was used in the latter part of the 20th century, and to some extent it's still used today. One-drop rule, if you guys don't know about it, it's if somebody is deemed to be black, they are to be discriminated against. Then how, within the juridical capacity, to conceal the first dimension of the race, how it functions in technology, is basically behind a more official or procedural one. So they used to use the 1/8 rule. So for example, if you're not deemed black, if someone looking at you cannot really tell that you look black, but then you have, you cover it up with a more procedural way. So you will look at the lineage of that person. So for example, a woman can look, she can have blonde hair, blue eyes, but at the same time, her grandfather's probably was black, so she has essentially a 1/8 drop of black blood in her system. So she would not be able to jump into the hierarchical system or register herself as a white person. She would have to go back and register herself as a black person, and it still happens today sometimes. And then the above 2 dimensions are concealed through a relationship to law and sovereign power behind seemingly objective moral and political judgments. That's when the sovereign power actually categorizes the humans on this criteria, which is used for one set of group in the population, being the minority, to go against the majority to actually have certain perceptions about the minority. The story of liberalism. I would like to reject the very dominant narrative we have for the story of liberalism, which entails that the fundamental function of the law is to protect all human beings, but only all human beings which fall within his purview. That being said, if that's the dominant narratives to hold true, that means the story of modernity, which is basically epoch of violence, dehumanization, brutality, is just mere accidents or mishaps, or I think a better word term to use would be the misapplication of the justice, if that holds true. Now, the story of modernity is basically as the one of the violence, which is basically dependent on the sovereign power. The sole purpose of the sovereign power is to actually, which is a state, to preserve itself. It controls its populations, and it only protects the right of the certain segments of the population which are in coherence or incongruent with their own political agenda. So that's how the state actually functions. The sovereign power, as we discussed before, biopolitics and scientific management are its two dimensions. Unruly and vulnerable population. Sovereign power considers it as a threat to its own conservation, which we just talked about. Racialization of a population. Racialization is a process of delineating a population in contrast to a dominant population and a corresponding political tension. Rwanda, 1994, it was a systematic murder of 1 million Tutsis done by Hutus. So essentially, the Tutsis had a hierarchical position, and they had a dominant social status in Rwanda due to their economic status. So during the Belgian colonization, during the independence, Hutus were claiming that they actually had a better right to the political system after the independence due to their them being indigenous population, and Belgium at that point in time, they actually gave the political power to Hutus. So when Hutus came into power, they were actually using this very same logic, which we discussed before, race as a technology, to actually discriminate, and they ended up mass murdering Tutsis, up to 1 million. That's actually a very conservative number. Japanese American during the World War II, 1942 to 1945, there were a lot of camps where Japanese American had to report after the attack on the Pearl Harbor. All the Western states actually, all the Japanese living in the Western states had to report to the centers, and where they were actually imprisoned. And some of the Japanese were there for 60 plus years. The second and third generations, even though they were citizens of America, they were still indicted at that point in time. So all their rights were pretty much taken away from them. Strangers. According to the Oxford Dictionary, records the use of the root strange as first appearing in 1290 to evoke the description of someone who belongs to a place or locality other than one's own. A second definition evokes a character for a person, language, or a custom that is foreign or alien. So contrary to the dictionary's, the Oxford Dictionary's definition, it's basically the unacceptability of the dominant population to accommodate themselves to the incoming influx of immigrants, so call it, or anything which kind of looks or appears to be strange, which they're not used to seeing. If somebody's wearing a scarf on their head, if somebody has braids in their hair, and they got beads in the braids as well, so it's something which is very strange. So they're not willing to actually adapt to the influx of the new immigrants coming in. They should be rather that. The Unruly by Honing is a philosopher. He says, although we may sometimes persecute people because they are foreign, the deeper truth is that we almost always make foreign those who we persecute. It's something to think about. The newest unruly threat. I have nothing to say about that. I'm pretty sure you guys can all guess who the newest unruly threat is nowadays. It's Muslims, in case you guys didn't know that. Constitutional rights, political or human. Reading the Constitution as a document that enumerates those rights extend to individuals as human beings, but by offering this reading only to its citizens. The states de facto insists upon a second meaning of constitutional protections that illuminates them as political and hence selective rights, which can be extended only to friends and not enemies, which corresponds to distinction, simply put, between us and them. So essentially, to be human is meaningless unless you have a membership in a political society. So if you're not part of that political society as a member, or if you, for example, an alien or immigrant without any legal paperwork done, you are not afforded, or these rights are not extended to you as per the Constitution, because you don't fit the definition of being human. Because you're only human within a certain context if you are part of the bigger political society. Conclusion, race itself is a product of technologies of sovereign power, which deploys whatever resources it has at its disposal to identify a population that is threatening to its own self-preservation, but it does so through the neutralizing rhetoric of classification, procedures, rule of law, judging and regulating those threats to the safety of the population under its care. I will conclude it here. Is it Sean?
Thanks.